Good evening, folks. Shall we all rise, please? Before we say tonight's prayer, I better step back a little bit. Before I say the prayer tonight, there was a couple of flyers I put around here on the Election Day sermon. For those of you who are interested, see me afterwards and I'll give you a flyer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this gathering. We thank you for the ability to come together. And we just pray, Lord, that you will guide our leaders in this country. The God of the heaven is not the God over there in the Middle East. And we pray that you will guide us and help us through your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. The pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Carol. Education classes.
Hi, everybody. Does everybody know what yesterday was?
Constitution Day.
Tuesday? It was Tuesday. What else was it?
Constitution Day.
Oh, I think I heard it. Constitution Day. That is correct. 223 years ago. 220, I forget. I think it's 223 years ago. Well, yesterday was also another important day. It was the day I got my cast off my arm. So, anyway, Constitution class for October. Wednesday, October 1st at 6 p.m. So that's October 1st. So don't let it creep by and miss it. And Monday, October 6th at 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. So Wednesday the 1st at 6 or Monday the 6th at 3 and 6. Okay, thank you.
Bruce Reagan's going to make some announcements.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. I'm Bruce Rader, and I'm here to ask you for money. We have some good news. We have a corporate sponsor for October.
Maybe we can turn the volume down. Yeah, maybe we can turn it down a little bit over there, the master volume.
Good news. We have a corporate sponsor for our October meeting. Gil is here tonight from Window Washing Company, and he'll be our corporate sponsor. So, you want to stand up again? So, there'll be more on Gil for our October meeting. He'll have a banner and some flyers. But we still have November and December open. If anybody wants to be a corporate sponsor, or if you want to be a personal sponsor, we still have November and December open. So talk to your boss, talk to your friends, be generous when we pass the pot around, and thank you for your time.
Good evening. I'm Linda Brancadora, and I'm membership chairman, and I welcome all of you tonight. I'm so glad you're here. I just want to say a little bit about the Johnstown trip that we were on. I know Sam's shuddering because everybody's going to talk about it. But what we did, we started out at Bethel, we met in the parking lot, and carpooled. And now Sam and I have a van, so we knew we were going to take some people with us. And so we got up there, we got some people in the car, and it was two gentlemen, and they were older than we are. So I thought, oh my goodness, Sam and I, we're looking at each other, we thought, this is going to be a long trip. But I'll tell you what, from the time we got out of that parking lot, the chatter was just tremendous. We had Bob Moyer and Charles Brookman, and the two of them just talked our ears off the whole trip, up and back. In fact, Charlie even said one time, I wanted to sleep on the way home, but I didn't get a chance. It was too much talking. It was so funny. But Bob Moyer, are you here tonight, Bob? Are you here? both were very, very nice. But he told me a story, and I just want to run it by you. And you have to understand, if you know Bob Moyer, he is very, very Dutchified. Very Dutchified. So you have to listen real close to understand what he's saying. But he was telling us some stories, and one of them was about these newfangled farm equipment that milks cows all by itself. It must cost $1 million, but these cows are herded into this area, and they're herded in with the idea of getting cow candy, you know? And, you know, it's like grain that the cows like, so they go in there because they want the candy. So they have a chip, a computer chip on their neck, so they go in there and they're eating this candy, and the computer chip tells them, okay, then they got to get milk. The thing comes up and starts milking them. The food goes off, and out they go. Well, these cows aren't too stupid. Around they go again to come back in. But when they get up to the trough to get the candy, the chip says, you were already here. Out you go. And they push it, and I thought that was the funniest thing. Okay. Anyway, I just want to thank Charlie and Bob Moyer. We had a great time with you guys. It was great. And also, we went a couple weeks before that, and we had Skip Moyer and Butch Imhoff and Bruce Rager, and we had a wonderful time then too. So if you're thinking about ever going on a trip, go with us. We don't just work, we have a good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm glad you took Sam along. I've got a couple of quick things here. We did a blue paper survey, and boy, it showed up a lot of really neat comments that we're going to discuss at our board meeting. But the results of what you thought was the most things that we want to discuss kind of surprised some of us. It went, first was illegal immigration, Common Core, gun control, pension reform, and eminent domain came in fifth, which was eminent domain needs fixing. The other thing, we had a stand set up at Leesport Community Days last weekend, and only needed 4 people. We had 7 volunteer, which I just think is fantastic. And I want to thank everybody who volunteered. The other thing, you're aware that 76 got out of the Finance Committee. It's going to probably wind up in Appropriations Committee. You'll hear more about it. This morning I got an email from the Realtors Association. Rest assured the realtors are doing their part. On Monday, when we heard the winner of the vote in the Finance Committee, a call to action was put out to our state association. In a matter of less than 24 hours, we had sent out over 4,300 emails to various senators across the state. My point is, we're not alone. The bill is not out of the woods yet, and I know a lot of you people have been phone calling and emailing, and I'd just like to ask you to continue or increase your pace, because we do have a lot of help. Thank you.
Okay. One thing is, folks, you see we're at a different end of the hall tonight. That's because Woody, they have another event over there. It's not because we're downsizing. In fact, we're planning for growth. But just wanted to let you know why we're over here in this cozier area. Elections. We have we have openings on our board. There are 5 board members that are up for re-election, and there are 2 other board positions available. So if anybody is interested, talk to me. If you want to, the board meets minimally once a month, usually the second Thursday after our general meeting here. So we are looking for some people to fill some slots and continue our work here. And here we go. Sam.
Hello, folks. Now, I'm going to read a lot of this because I'm only given a short period of time. I can't get it all in. First of all, folks, Tuesday was a great day. Tuesday was a great day for all taxpayers in Pennsylvania. I'm sure you all know by now that the Senate Finance Committee voted SB 76 out of committee. 7-6 vote. Now, it was a tough battle. We have other battles to come, but for the moment, let's savor this victory. This was a unity effort by all groups and people throughout the state. Everybody pitched in. It wasn't one particular group. And I'd like to at least acknowledge, some of these people. First of all, you people here, all of you. We want to thank all of you so much. All of you did. The emails you sent through, your letters, the petition signing. You remember doing the trips to Harrisburg? You remember doing the T-shirts and logos? Anybody remember that? Judy, do you remember that? I'm sure you do. Okay, great. So folks, we want to thank you so much for that. We're only as strong as our membership. You need to do what you've been doing. That's fantastic. Also, you should be so proud of your board. They worked very, very hard as well. There was a lot of things done that you're not aware of. There was expense. There was a lot of frustration and disappointment. However, they persevered like all of you did as well. I want to mention a few groups. PICC, that is the Pennsylvania Taxpayers Cyber Coalition. It's headed by David Bollinger. He is a key man. He is one that helped write this bill. This is a people's bill. This was not written in Harrisburg. This was written outside of Harrisburg. However, they had to use guidance from certain politicians. So he is a player. Think of him, at least as far as HB 76 is concerned, think of him as General Eisenhower in the Second World War. That's his position in this particular bill. And David had plus sample letters. They've done quite a few other things as well. They've been on this ride. They worked as hard, as others. So we want to thank them too. 11 and 912. That's Jim Rocky and Sue. They've done a lot over the years. I just want to read you part of an email that they sent. They went to Harrisburg on last Monday. First of all, there was an online petition that people signed. They collected this petition, wanted to take this to Harrisburg on Monday and give it to all the senators. And I will read what Jim said. The process of printing began, which started out on the wrong foot. We blew a printer head and had to go and get a replacement printer. 14 reams of paper, 9 print cartridges, 53 thermal bundles, and about 85 hours later, the job was finished. This is one job to take these to Harrisburg on Monday. Wow, that's fantastic. Thanks, Sue and Jim. Campaign for Liberty, Dean Clark. Dean led the outreach effort. First County Patriots and other groups supported him. We actually went into other districts of senators close by and some not so close by. Specifically, we went into, Senator Teplett's district, Senator Nance, and Senator Wozniak. Now, what we did, we went right to where they lived. We actually went to their homes. We went to their neighbors. We talked to the neighbors who didn't even know what was going on. And our hope here was to educate the people around there and at the same time have them hopefully talk to the senator and convince the senator to change his position. Now, we felt that he was key. So that's why there was actually 4 trips to Johnstown. The Johnstown is 3.5 hours one way. So that's quite a day, and Linda actually mentioned that. Dean then, in addition to those trips, he set up a town hall. Town hall meeting, this was for last Thursday. We didn't know how this was going to turn out. Hired Hall, invited Senator Wozniak, paid for advertising. We had press coverage, we had print, TV coverage and press coverage. We had flyers go out. We actually spent $3,500 on this. Did not know what was going to happen. We got there early, ate a bit. No one could eat too much. Our stomachs were churning. Didn't know what. We had the room locked up. So finally, Linda was the first one to leave. She goes there and says, "Oh my gosh, there's people here." Wow, that's fantastic. That's what we want. So here, it was hugely successful. We had 90 people there, 10 of us and 80 local people. Senator Wozniak did show up. He came with a heavy hitter. First of all, he was not pleased. He did not like outsiders driving 3.5 miles, setting up a meeting in his district, and getting his people together to do this. So he didn't like one bit. So what did he do? He brought the former Secretary of Education under Rendell, the heaviest hitter you could possibly bring. Asked him to speak. We allowed him 5 minutes to speak. He gave the normal. Yes, we need to eliminate. Yes, we need to reduce property taxes, but we got to be careful what we do. We got to go slow. The whole thing that you hear from the opposition. David sitting up in the podium after the secretary was done. David just ripped him to shreds. You just have to watch the video. Then David gave his presentation. And again, you need to watch the video. It was fantastic. It was hugely successful. There was business people there. Every person there was for SB 76 and against the senator. Well, maybe there was one person that might have supported him. I'll let you decide that. This person got up in front and he says, "You people, you're the problem. Your fault. You let this happen. You voted him in office. If you don't want this, vote him out of office." Paraphrasing. But that's the closest he got to support, if you think that's support. Now, this did cost $3,500. Dean fronted the money. So far, we've collected only $1,800. If you guys can help out, we certainly would appreciate it. On your chair, you'll see there's a small slip there. It has Dean's address, $5. Anything that you can do would be appreciated. This was hugely successful, and we want to consider doing something like that again. Just to let you know, we started this many months ago. We needed 2 votes. Actually, we need to change 2 votes. That's harder than getting 2 votes. Change 2 votes. Through your efforts, and people like you, you wound up getting 1 vote. That was fantastic. That was a lot of effort. What that did was, that put us into the ball game. Now we needed 1 more. However, by that time, we're in the 4th quarter. We're on the 50-yard line. We need a touchdown to win. 1 second to go, we call timeout. We then come up with the right plan. Come back on the field, and we wind up scoring that win, scoring that vote. The final score was 6 for We the People, 5 for Status Quo. That took us over the edge. And if you get a chance to watch the hearing, that was 11 o'clock. Actually, this went on about 12 o'clock. Wozniak, you cannot believe you think this guy was always for SB 76. He was the cheerleader there. He was fantastic. So this was hugely successful. Where do we go from here? I don't want to steal any of Rod's thunder. It does go to the Appropriation Committee. I'm not going to go through any details there, other than say that on those little slips you have there, the chairman, Foreman, correct? We would appreciate it if you would give him a call. Between now and Tuesday morning, particularly Tuesday morning. The only thing you're asking to do, run the bill. Just bring it up for a vote. That's all we need. We think we have the votes there. Okay. Ronald is going to say some more on this. Where does it go after that? The Senate. After the Senate, where does it go? It goes into the House. Folks, when it gets to the House, it's going to be bloody. It's going to be very difficult fighting the special interests financially. We're going to have the teachers unions. We're going to have the trial lawyers. We're also going to have the regular lawyers. So that is going to be, that's a lot of money they have. So that's going to be very, very difficult for us. However, we have something they don't have. We have you. We have we the people. We have the grassroots. And as long as we make our voice known, we have power. And folks, we need to use that power. We need to use it either at the ballot box or in their neighborhoods. We can do this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm going to mention back at, I guess Jake at the table, at the merchandise table, has Boscov's coupons for sale. These are 25% off coupons that we're selling for $5. And you can use them on really big ticket items, so you need to spend it on something worth $25 or more to get your $5 back. And they're for sale back there. All of the $5 goes to us, the Patriots. So if you shop at Boscov's and or have a big ticket item coming up that you want to make a big savings on, there's an opportunity there for you. Also on your chair was a small activities, upcoming events list. Make sure you take that with you. Judy Pelka put that together. And now, Jamie. Rod, are you coming up? I'm a little confused on my agenda here.
Afraid I get feedback. Feedback I usually get is from the liberals. Anyway, a little bit more regarding SB 76, just so you have an understanding what we're looking at here. I spent the last couple of days going through the legislative process.
Rod, lift the mic up a little more.
And that better?
Yeah.
The legislative process and how many days they have to work for the next several weeks to find out where this bill's going to go. And I don't have the time to go through a lot of it, but I'm going to give you a real fast rundown what this looks like. For instance, on the 16th, which is what Sam talked about, was voted out of the Finance Committee, 6-5. From there, it would have to go with further action, which it did on the 17th, and the Senate President should then direct it to go to the Appropriations Committee. Now, it won't get to the Appropriations Committee till Monday. And then on Tuesday, if they stay on target, the Appropriations Committee will submit it to the floor for consideration. And on the 24th, that'd be the 23rd, on the 24th, they would move for the third consideration. The first two were considered completed based on the process. So the third consideration would be on the 24th. That's when, if there's any amendments, that's when the amendments would hit. And whether or not there'll be any amendments, it all depends what kind of infighting takes place. And as Sam said, if the teachers union has their minions where they're financing candidates, and they'll tell them, you want to check for the next campaign, you better get up to that microphone and argue our case. So it could happen. Then on the 25th and 26th, that's Thursday, Friday, they don't work. They put in 3 days. So that puts you down to 9, 29, 30, and 10, 1. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They don't work. I think they're out campaigning to get reelected. So the work days, the lack of work days is our big problem, not so much the process. And then we go back after that day, then we go to 10-2 and 10-3, that's a Thursday, Friday. They're never in session Thursday, Friday. Then we go to 10-6, and that's final passage. That's when, if the Senate votes to pass it, it goes to the House. That goes 10-7 on Tuesday, and it'll be reported to the House Committee, which probably will be the Finance Committee, or I should say the Appropriations Committee in the House. And that will be moved for a second consideration in the House. After that, that's Thursday, Friday again. After that Wednesday, they don't work. That puts us to 10-13, which is the following Monday. They don't work. That's Columbus Day. 10-14. It should get reported out of Appropriations Committee, and that would be the third consideration. Again, any amendments. But if that happens, then on the 15th, it would be final passage from the House. Here's the kicker. The 15th is their last legislative session. I gave you no gaps in that schedule for any kind of prohibitions. Filibusters from the floor, fight for addendum, amendments, even reprinting. And the worst scenario, well, there's three worst scenarios. One of them is if the Senate does not vote 26-4. They think they have the votes. If we get through that, then the House has to vote 102-4. And if we don't get that 102, then we're stuck again. And after those two issues, we still have to get it through the process, and all the paper has to be retyped. And the third of the worst scenarios is an amendment gets through. If an amendment gets through the House with 102 votes, it has to be rewritten, sent back to the Senate. Well, the session is over, October the 15th. So, now there's another session after that. It's called Sign or Die. We call it the lame duck session. That's when they all go back after the election, where those that were reelected congratulate each other, and those that lost elections console each other. But there's not much legislation accomplished. They'll probably vote new chairmanships for all the committees. And that would be the extent of that. So that's an overview of the process of getting these bills where they have to go. It's like a 400-meter hurdle race, and we jumped the first hurdle. Now we got the rest to get over. So I ran about 15 copies of this. You don't expect to remember date. I don't expect it to. But there's about 15 copies there. For those that want to really track this to see if we're on target, you can take one with you and find out if I'm lying, because something might happen that messes my whole schedule up. But the way it looks, it's going to be close. Date-wise, it's going to be really close. Okay, enough on that. Legislative committee, your board and your legislative committee, and people like Sam and Linda and Dean Klopp, who really worked hard this past month, put a lot of time in to get through that hurdle. But we've all been busy, been writing phone calls on SB 76. We met with Lieutenant Governor Cawley, and he got hammered. We let him know all of our issues. He carried it with him. And the other night, you might have saw it in the paper, we were over at the Dairy Queen, where the governor was there. And if you weren't there, you missed a free cone of ice cream. I'm sorry to tell you, but anyway, it was no speech. So we got through that. Now we still have a lot of issues. Issues are not going away. That's our problem. All those issues that we had in the first place, property tax, pension reform, paycheck protection, cost of government, Common Core, although I think Common Core might have jumped a hurdle. They're still there. We're not solving problems. They're not solving problems that we can move on. They're not solving problems we have to stay on. Our legislative committee continues to be inundated with issues. So I'm encouraging anybody that wants to be part of the legislative committee. We try to meet once a month, but some of the stories of some of these issues I raised, They could use second help. You don't have to be a key person. Just volunteer to help one of the committee people to help do some research on these bills. I know the cost of government is one issue that we want to get on heavily. I've looked into this a long time ago. In fact, the last month's meeting, I mentioned some of it, but even the governor says he's looking to reduce the size of the legislature. And since they don't get a lot done, I'm all for that anyway. If I'm going to pay them to do nothing, I might as well pay less of them to do nothing. Okay. So, we get through that, and we continue to track these issues. And if you want to be part of the legislative, again, just give Linda your name, and we'll get back to you. We'll let you know what's to expect. So, now we go to the pension crisis. You saw the papers the last few days. It was either pensions or property tax. Pensions or property tax. We got the two hot buttons. We heard all about the property tax. We're going to get into pensions now. And Jamie is our steward on the pension crisis. And she will go through where we are in the pensions, so you know, as you know, that Tom Corbett says we got a pension problem. Kurt Wolf says we don't have a pension problem. I say we report, you decide. But in the words of Ed McMahon, here's Jamie.
Cheaters on. Good evening. My name is Jamie Kyle, for those of you that don't know who I am. And in addition to being with Rod on the legislative committee, I'm responsible for the website, and I also send the emails and write the newsletter. So, but what I'm going to do tonight is I just want to spend a little bit more time talking about pension reform. I talked about this at the last general meeting as well. On your seats, some of you will see a sheet of paper that has CSRS and PSRS information. I didn't have enough copies to put on each seat, so I sort of put one on every other seat. If you don't mind sharing with your neighbor or whatever, that would be great. And then you're certainly welcome to keep this information. But this actually ties in with SB HB 7. Driving property taxes up is pension escalation. So that's what I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about with you tonight. And when I go through the numbers, one of the things I reminded everyone last month, and I'd like to remind again this month, is the government does not build a product or sell anything. Okay, they have no money unless it's our money. So when you look at these numbers that are being paid out and the debt that has accumulated, it's our debt, because eventually someone's going to have to pay for it or make some really big decisions. So that was part of the reason I wanted to hand out this information. Although this is only a portion of the pension issue, it is a big portion of it. But again, this is our money. This isn't, we're not going to print our way out of this. So Pennsylvania has about 3,200 pension plans. It's more than any other state in the union. And as I'm going to go through, many of them are grossly underfunded. The thing that we tend to forget is that this problem is not only at the state level, but it trickles all the way down through the municipalities into our local issues, which is what I'm going to talk about some tonight. But the largest funds is the information that I handed to you about the CSRS and PSRS. And I just want to take a moment for you to look at the numbers that are on that paper so you can understand the number of people, which is why the force against any change in property taxes as high as it is and any change in pension reform. The smaller of the two organizations is the state employees retirement system. And you'll notice that across the state there are over 200,000 members, and that's the smaller of the two organizations. The larger of the two has 600,000, over 600,000 members. So do the math in terms of influence, concerns, I mean, it's huge. And we're just talking the people here. And then when you look at the dollars involved and the shortfall, it's just staggering. So I just want you to keep this information, and it is something that we need to stay aware of. Just some other numbers. So when you look at the total shortfall of each fund, the smaller of the two at the state level is $17.9 billion. This larger of the two funds is a total of $32.6 billion underfunded. So that leaves us with this total unfunded liability as of this year, and again, each year this goes on, this is going to continue to get bigger. So as of now, it's $50.5 billion. And of course, we don't have any problems as far as some people are concerned. It's just going to go away. So the pension payments in 2016 and 17 is going to represent 12% of the state general fund budget. So from this year, it's 4%. In 2 years, it will jump to 12% of the state general fund. So that's what this debt looks like. And it was also reported that the State Association of School District officials calculated that the average pension costs will rise 25% this school year after a similar increase last year. By 2020, the report said pension costs will be the equivalent of 30% of payroll, up from just 4% of payroll in 2009. So it's just, so what's happening? One of the things I wanted to talk about is actually what's happening at the local level. In July, the governor's office disclosed that 163 school districts around the state filed for an exception to the state's property tax cap, which limits yearly increases in local taxes. Every one of them cited rising pension costs as one of the reasons for the request for the exception to the law. So, for example, residents of the Conewago School District, which serves nearly 4,000 students in Adams County, will see their property taxes go up 5%. The Carlisle Area School District, educating some 4,700 students in Cumberland County, imposed its 4th consecutive property tax increase this year. The Warrior-run school district in Union and Northumberland counties has a different way of raising revenues. They've sent registered letters to dozens of property owners advising them that it is challenging the assessments of their properties, asking for a higher value and tax bill. Higher. With health and pension costs creating $1 million deficit, the district is looking to generate $600,000 from this unusual reassessment move. Some of the other solutions, and I'm going to try to be quick about this, the Auditor General is trying to look at consolidating all municipal funds together into larger funds and then backstopping the underfunded systems with state funds. So what they're looking to do is collapse all the toxic funds into a large state pool and then issue state-backed debt to fund the pool. Have we heard about that before? Does that sound a little familiar? In terms of what happened in the stock market. I'm trying to get through this because we're sort of running out of time. I wanted to go through some other examples. The Pennsylvania combined underfunded, I said, was $15.5 billion. Gets a little worse. When the unfunded health care and other post-employment benefits are included, the number rises to $74 billion. Just to keep the story going. So, just to go real quickly here, in York, their municipal pensions plans are underfunded by close to $50 million. York City has now proposed a distressed pension income tax on commuters. Scranton's pension plan is headed towards insolvency, so earlier this year the city enacted a new commuter tax to raise $5 million. York, like Scranton, can levy that tax thanks to a Pennsylvania law that allows municipalities with pensions that don't meet funding standards to impose local income taxes. But commuters cannot be taxed at a higher rate than local residents. So both Scranton and York will have to raise taxes on their residents as well. Allentown's unfunded pension liability reached approximately $150 million last year, and then the city acted on a 50-year concession lease of its water and sewer utility system. So I don't want to take up any more time because I know we're short on that. But the last thing that I wanted to leave you with is a question, and we asked this question the last time. There is a constitutional question here regarding pensions in general for the General Assembly, which I haven't even addressed. But to send a message to Harrisburg, Article 2, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution states, the members of the General Assembly shall receive such salary and mileage for regular and special sessions as shall be fixed by law and no other compensation whatever, whether for service upon committee or otherwise. No member of either house shall, during the term for which he may have been elected, receive any increase of salary or mileage under any law passed during such term. And we can go through the history of what happened with that, but the Pennsylvania Constitution seems to clearly state that at least at the legislative level, they should not be receiving pensions, which I didn't even discuss tonight in these numbers. So the issue, as we said before, with pension reform is that the numbers are huge, they're staggering. The Democrat Party believes that there was a bill signed into law in 2010 that will fend off this debt, that somehow it will just sort of be worked out through some manipulation of numbers and actuarial tables and all this kind of stuff. And Wolf is saying that there is no problem. And Corbett has committed that this is a cornerstone piece of legislation he's very interested in. He has been pushing it. I went over the last time his hybrid bill, which is Tobosh's bill, that really doesn't answer the problem to any degree, because that bill is, if it were signed into law, would save approximately $10 billion, but over 30 years. And the near-term debt is not affected at all. So there is no stemming of the tide. Unless you look 30 years out. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. Two other numbers, two other little add-ons to that. I believe the accepted figure now as cost to you is $12,000 per household for the pension deficit. Every household in Pennsylvania owes $12,000 for their guaranteed pensions. That's a lot of money. 2 years ago, I think the number was, they said anywhere from $800 to $9,500, but the accepted figure in Harrisburg now is $12,000. And when they say about the state budget deficit, the pension deficit's not included in the state budget. So just think about that as well. Those are separate compartments. We're going to have one of our main speakers here tonight, Debbie Oliveri. She's ready to go. She'll tell you about her office and how important it is, and all the openings to work the elections, polling booths and whatnot. Let's welcome her with applause here.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Debbie Oliveri. I'm the Director of Elections. Karen Barsom is here with me tonight. She's my assistant. They've asked me to come and talk to the group about voter registration, which is one of the functions of our office. Currently, we have about 245,000 voters on our rolls. I can honestly say probably about 20% of that are inactive voters due to the voter removal program that, we do every year that have to be removed. The registration for this election for anybody to change their party, change their address, must be done by October 6th. That's the deadline. Our office has about 7 days after the deadline to process anything that comes in by mail that is not postmarked. We then have to start gearing up, getting ready, printing poll books, getting everything together for November 4th election. And speaking of the election, we are currently hurting for poll workers. And I'm here tonight to ask if you guys can spread the word. The newspaper will have something in tomorrow over our office looking for people to work the polls. It goes great on election day. I hear a lot of stories from our poll workers. They have some great smorgasbords going on in some of those polling places. A lot of them were surprised that we even pay them for the day. And actually, the poll workers did receive an increase in pay. Not much. They get $110, and the judge of election gets about $120 plus mileage. And a lot of people consider it their civic duty. So I'm here to plead, if you know anybody who has nothing to do November 4th and would like to pick up a couple extra bucks to give our office a call. The other thing that we have going on, the other deadline that we need to pay attention to is the last day to apply for an absentee ballot, and that's October 28th. So anybody who's going to be out of the municipality needs to apply by 5 p.m. That's always a Tuesday prior to the election. And ballots are always due in by that Friday before the election by 5 o'clock. And that's for us to make sure, by law, we have to send any absentee ballot out to the polling place on election day to be counted at the polling place level. Some of the other functions of our office is to, besides ensuring voters the right to vote, that everybody gets the opportunity. There are several stories that we hear, and we really do training for our poll workers. We don't turn anybody away on election day. If somebody comes into the voting room and they're not in the poll book, they can vote a provisional ballot. Now, our office will check that provisional ballot when we do the canvass. And what the canvass is, we have to recount all the votes that were cast on November 4th. And it takes us about 5 days to go through all the write-ins. Last election, we only had about 5,000 write-ins. In the election before that, we probably had about 10,000 write-ins that we have to go through. And while I'm on the subject of write-ins, and hopefully you get the word out about this too, it happened with a lot of committee people positions. The election code states proper name. And to us, it's defined, proper name as being the name you are registered as. So if you're registered as John A. Smith, and you're written in as John A. Smith, I can count that. But if you do a write-in as John Smith, I can't count that. My only way of identifying anybody is by the voter registration rolls. And there are some people who are a little upset with the committee people positions last election that they weren't certified. And that's one of the reasons I am only allowed to count as you are registered to vote. So if someone does a write-in, we always suggest call our office. There's a lot of information on our webpage. How to run for office, what's needed to run for office, what you should do, how to register to vote. If you conduct a write-in and it's not done as you're registered, we have a form called a petition to accumulate. And I do announce, I try to use the media as much as possible, whether it's 69 News, WEEU, the Reagan Eagle, to get the word out that we're back. And you have 5 days to do that petition to accumulate the variation of your name. So if you're written in as J. Smith, that's one that really doesn't get counted, or your last name alone, because there could be a lot of people with the last name of Smith in your municipality, and it's kind of hard to say, yeah, hey, I'm that person. But anyhow, you have 5 days when we come back to petition that variation. Now, this election, write-ins usually are not an issue for us as much. Next year's municipal elections, it becomes more of an issue. So if you know of anybody who, for some reason, didn't circulate a petition to run and decides to do a write-in, make sure they contact our office, find out what the procedures are, what they have to do to follow up on it. Because it's not just doing that petition to accumulate. After that's done, you have to be sent paperwork to accept those write-in votes. So there's a lot of steps that our office has to do in order to make sure somebody can be placed on the ballot, okay? And the same thing happens in a general election. In a primary, for a write-in, you need the minimum number of signatures required on a petition. In the general election, it takes one vote to win an office, but one more vote than anybody else would receive. So a lot of people don't understand that procedure. Does anybody have any questions regarding the registration process? Anybody who, if they want to conduct a voter registration drive, we have information on that. If you're going to conduct a drive, on how to fill the forms out correctly. We try to make sure that if everything is done proper when the process begins, the end process is going to work a lot smoother. We get a lot of drives in our office, and those forms come back missing signatures, missing information. We have to send them back, okay? We get forms in from registration drives for other counties. I can't forward them to another county, especially if it's the last day that they come into our office. So we urge everybody to get everything into our office prior to the deadline. So if there's something that has to be changed, there's plenty of time for everybody to make those changes. Yes?
What are the criteria for accepting or rejecting provisional ballots?
When a provisional ballot comes in, I have 7 days to verify that ballot, okay? So let's say you live in Muhlenberg Township, 5th Precinct. You came into Muhlenberg, you weren't in the poll book. They offered you provisional ballot. You voted that ballot. I'm only allowed to count what you are eligible to vote for. So if you're in Muhlenberg 5, your legislative and senatorial districts are different than what they are in Exeter. So I can only count, take this election, governor is running countywide. So I would be able to count your vote for governor if you're registered. But Exeter has a lot of splits in it. Muhlenberg is mostly, I'll use the 126. Exeter has the 130th and a couple other districts running. So I cannot count the 126 since you're actually registered in Exeter. So I would only most likely be able to count the office of governor.
But they have to be registered somewhere.
In Berks County, yes. If someone votes a provisional and they're not registered, I can't count it. I can only count votes for who people are actually registered and for the districts they are registered in. Yes, sir.
Hi, Deb. Ricardo, did you speak to ballot questions, how the questions are placed on the ballot?
For this election?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you?
No, I haven't talked about the questions yet.
I got the question specifically about for the city of Reading. I understand there must be at least 7 or 8 different questions coming up. Is that fair?
There was an election board meeting today.
Okay.
There were 7 questions approved to be placed on the city of Reading ballot.
Is changing
the form of government?
Form of government.
Okay, the form of government one, I have a court order that I shall not, that I must remove that question from appearing on the ballot.
Okay, so that will not appear.
As of right now, that question does not appear on the ballots.
How does a voter get more information about these types of questions when they're... Can I cut to the chase?
Sure.
Okay. The city of Reading's education level is not where it should be from just an educational standpoint. So the questions that are being posed, I suspect, are being driven by those that are appointed. So, and you can clarify, correct me.
Okay. There are 3 different ways to place questions on a home rule charter ballot.
Okay.
Okay? One of them is by the committee. And the 6 that were on were approved by council by ordinance. Okay? To be placed on the ballot.
All right.
Okay? They provided us the ordinance number, council signed it. Okay? The question, the explanation of the question. The 2 other questions were done by citizen initiative, which is the other way that a question can appear on a ballot. Now, people get confused as to it being a question versus a referendum. The citizen initiative to change the home rule charter under the home rule optional plan is 10% of the signatures of the last time the governor ran. Okay? Other forms of referendum for the city, say the trash referendum that appeared a couple of years ago, they could do a petition, but that petition is 2,000 votes, and that is all done through by the city. Where anything to change the home rule option plan gets filed with the Board of Elections, and that is what was done with those 2 citizen initiative referendums. There was a challenge filed on the former government one. It went to court. I got a ruling the 10th that I must remove that from the ballot. The other one, which deals more with the water authority, is on the ballot. That was not challenged. There was an appeal filed on the former government one, so now that appeal is going to go to Commonwealth Court. So my problem now is, what am I to do? Because I'm 6 weeks out of an election. I have people who want their absentees. I have a board who approved the placement of these questions on. But when stuff like this happens, I'd rather something stay on that I can put a sticker over it. And it's harder for me to go back and put something back on a ballot.
How would that be? So, at the city of Reading, obviously, the ones that can always vote on those questions are constituents of the city of Reading. Is that correct?
Correct.
So then the city of Reading could actually make a difference as to how Rob could affect the county by that vote. Is that a fair statement?
I don't quite understand what you're saying. Our job is to place the questions on the ballot if they meet the statutory requirements to be placed on. Okay, so it's like our job is to get people elected and to have people vote. So those 7 questions are on the ballot, okay? I will post on my website sample ballots in a couple weeks. I will post the questions that are appearing, and I will also have the explanations of those questions appearing. I also have a question for the lower house system Mount Penn merger. That's another question that appears. So the same thing does apply to them too. There's deadlines that things have to be submitted, approved by the solicitor, Board of Election placement. So everything has to fall within the right regulations. So as far as education goes, I will talk to my poll workers about the questions. I will have explanations posted at the polling places along with the sample ballot. I will have in the city of Reading interpreters who are trained to help explain if a voter needs assistance. But as far as campaigning or anything else with any questions or anything on, my office is totally not partisan.
Okay, I respect that. I guess where I'm going is that Ronald does not only serve the city of Reading with water. It serves West Reading. It serves areas outside of the city city of Reading. So if Reading was to vote on something blah related, for some of these folks in here, it may actually change something for them. How would I go about challenging the question?
The challenge period to have that question placed on the ballot is over.
It's over.
You cannot, right, it's over. The challenge period. Right. That you could challenge, you could file a challenge in the Court of Common Pleas, not to have a question on the ballot, where you have to do briefs and everything else, and it goes in front of a judge, okay? That's over. So if you are against the question, then the only option you have is your voice to oppose a question or to ask the questions. What does that affect?
So then I would direct that towards council.
You would have to talk to council about it. I don't know much about the question. I know what the question is. I don't know what the actual, what would happen if the question would pass.
And that's all I was trying to figure out, where I could go for more additional information about the question.
Now, that question was submitted by citizen initiative. That wasn't initiated by council.
I understand. Okay. All right. I don't want to hold anybody up.
Oh, that's okay. Hopefully everybody learned about how a question goes on the ballot. Yes, sir.
My name is John I. I'm a resident of Cherry Township. My question is, are students at a university or college considered residents of the municipalities where they're located?
There was, I forget when it was passed, but college students are permitted to register to vote if they are living on college property.
Okay. Because I know several months ago there was a fuss going on, I think, between Kutztown University and Maxiconi Township. They wanted
I moved the polling place last year out of Kutztown, out of the university, because of the hole it was kept in, and they were in the lobby, and there were a lot of complaints. When the township building opened up, when the church allowed me to use them and open the township building up, and because the complaints received from the residents, I moved the polling place off the college to township building.
If they're from New Jersey and they attend Kutztown University, they're considered resident of Maxiconi Township.
If they register to vote on property, they can vote in that municipality.
Does that also apply to the military?
Military use their last known address. Okay, so we actually,
For absentee ballot.
right, actually our deadline to get our military out is tomorrow.
Okay.
Karen had everything processed and out today. Actually, everything went out prior to the city today until I got approval from the board to place those questions on the ballot. And the military can vote. They fill out a federal postcard application. They can email it or fax it to us. If they request to have the ballot emailed, Karen uploads ballots to a secure portal, state portal. The military, civilian overseas gets notification that their ballots are ready. They do a login. There's information they will get by email to access their ballot. They can print it out and mail it to us. They can't email me the ballot. I have to receive the paper, actual paper ballot. Things are a little easier now for military and civilian overseas.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
What is your website?
www.countyofberks.com/elections. The best thing to do is to go to County of Berks website, go into departments, look up elections, click on that, and that'll take you to our website. Any other questions?
Here.
Yes.
What is the deadline for the military personnel deployed to get it back?
It's 7 days after the election. It used to be, it had to be postmarked the day before. The language was changed to the UOC HAVA Move Act, where it now has to be, they signed a statement on the back of that ballot saying it was mailed by 11:59 the day prior to the election. So as long as I get it 7 days after, it is counted.
Okay, so if they mail it before the deadline, it takes a week to 10 days.
Right. I have to get it within it's about 7 days after the day of the election, I have to receive that. And also, another thing, absentee voters, okay? The voter ID bill, it's gone, okay? It was challenged, it's gone. But anybody who requests to vote an absentee ballot, that was not included in that challenge. So people who apply for an absentee ballot have to supply their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And that goes through a verification process. It passes, we mail out the ballot. I'm not there yet though, but I'm hoping within the next week or 2 I'll be mailing out absentee ballots. If it comes back unverified, I can't hold back that ballot. I still have to mail that ballot out to them. But they will get a piece of paper, a form inside with their ballot, informing them that they need to provide us with identification. They can call the office or they can submit the form in a separate envelope than their ballot was put in. Because if it's in their ballot, I don't know what's there. I'm not allowed to open them up. Okay? So that's another thing people aren't sure with the absentee ballot. Yes, sir.
What are the criteria for purging the rolls, and are you up to date on that?
I keep pretty well up to date on those rolls. Okay, I don't want to bore everybody, but there's an NCOA, it's called National Change of Address, where once a year, the entire state's registration system gets sent out to the post office, and they match the records with anybody who has changed their address gets a flag. I have to mail somebody out a card saying that, you know, your address is according to the post office you moved. You need to confirm your address. We mailed out 22,000 cards this summer. Did I get them all back? No. I got a couple thousand back. There's also a 5-year no activity mailing that we do. And most of them were the presidential election, not this past one, the one prior, for no activity. And they will be removed. But it takes me almost 6 to 8 years to remove somebody once they are flagged inactive. And the biggest complaint we get is our rolls. Because I'm told someone goes to someone's house and the person says, they've been living there for years. And they're yelling at me on the phone. Well, I can only do so much. So, I guess I'm done. So, the Help America Vote Act's intentions was to give everybody the opportunity to vote, and nobody gets turned away. Okay? Unfortunately, people move, people don't keep registration updated, and it's usually something they think about twice a year. And most of the time it's a week before the election. So, you know, would I like to see something done differently? Yes. But it's federal law that is regulating us right now. Yes?
I was just wondering, this probably would only work for a presidential election. Is it possible that a student coming to school, say, at Kutztown College, registers there and votes there, but their home is in South Carolina? Could they send for an absentee ballot and vote in South Carolina, therefore they could vote twice for president?
Do you want my opinion, or do you want you want to know? Yes, it is possible, because there's within the state of Pennsylvania, if someone's in Penn State, okay, and their residence is here, we'll catch it within state. I can't catch it out of state. I'm being honest with you. There's no cross-state check program for that. So.
What about deaths? What if somebody dies? How long does it take to get them off the roll?
Department of Health sends us records.
How often?
Department of Health is 6 months behind. Okay. If somebody, I can only remove a voter if they're deceased by receiving a death certificate, okay, from a family member. Oh, and it happens to us all the time. I don't use obits because the obits doesn't have the complete voter information in it, And people don't like it if I accidentally kill them and have to resurrect them on election day. So I stay away from the obits. But we do. Department of Health is one of the things. And on election day, if you go to the polling place and a family member sees that their spouse or somebody's in there, there's a form called Notice of Deceased that can be completed on election day that we can remove them. The reason we only do what we can is because you might not like your neighbor. And you send me something, hey, he's dead. I'm his sister. Remove him. So we're really careful as to how we can remove somebody from the rolls.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you much, Debbie. I'm just surprised how many people had questions. It's a shame we didn't schedule a little bit differently. But I got to tell you, though, when she talked about people complaining about not being certified because of a write-in, I'm her poster boy. I had my wife and I write in my name. I wrote in her name. So each of us got 2 votes, and there's nobody in my district ever runs for committee. She got her certification. I didn't get one. I called Debbie. Debbie said, "But you're registered as Rodney E. Miller, and you only wrote in Rodney Miller. For one of an E." I called Mr. Meinbach. He said, "Well, there's a couple of counties follow it to the letter, and other counties are trying to be flexible," and he was going to bring it up at the next county board meeting. I don't know if he ever did.
I didn't bring it up for the past meeting because the Department of State, because so many offices cross county lines, we're going to have a writing committee. So once they have that committee, I'll then I figure I'll bring those results to the board and they can make a decision. But something will be done before next year's election. And again, I'm sorry. You were like.
Okay. I have a soft spot in my heart for balloons. That's one reason I took it easy. Anyway, I'm not here to talk elections anymore. She did a fine job, and I appreciate the questions. But we're here for now to hear our keynote speaker of the evening. And if you hear a slight accent, that's not a First County drawl. It's because he's originally from Texas, and he became the Pennsylvanian. In fact, not I guess long after high school. In fact, he said he voted for John Tower. I know John Tower. I was at Washington in the early very tall, and he had a tall lady on each arm. I said, "Who is that?" They said, "That's John Tower. That's the way he works." So I know John Tower. Okay. We have a gentleman who really went through Harvard School, and in spite of going through Harvard, he didn't turn into a liberal. He's now a history professor at Lebanon Valley College, and I don't know him from that, but I know him from he's been around all of our events. If there's a rally and he could get there, he was there. If there was a speech by a politician at the time at the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Building, he was there. He wasn't timid about asking a tough question. So he then became chair of what is called CAP, Citizens Against Higher Taxes. I must believe there's very few people here who wouldn't support that cause. So he's right on all occasions. And beyond that, I would just mention that he supported Bush, the elder, because he thought Reagan was too conservative. Now you talk about oxymorons, there's one. He learned the hard way, but he learned. So, he just finished his book, a scholarly book on Ronald Reagan. He has them here this evening. He told us that he's selling them to us at his wholesale price. He'll autograph them. So if anybody wants a book after his talk, there should be some back at the table. So, with that, I guess I will introduce my longtime friend, Dr. Jim Broussard.
All righty, well, I hate to be at a podium, but say requires a little note. I guess I better stay up here. Here's the book, by the way. It's this is really horrible. You know, this is the only book by a historian about Reagan that is sympathetic to Reagan, because about 95% of historians are either liberals or Marxists, and so what they write about Reagan is, what shall we say? Well, you know what they would say. No, I wasn't for Bush in 1980 because I thought Reagan was too conservative. I thought he was too conservative to win. I thought, oh, Bush, you know, he's this nice moderate guy, he'll get the votes. Boy, was that wrong. He couldn't even get the nomination. I want to speak a little bit today, and most of this comes out of the book, but I want to speak today about why we still believe Ronald Reagan is the great conservative champion. And beyond the things that are pretty obvious to everyone, like tax cuts and trying to roll back federal regulations and the Reagan economic boom that lasted almost 20 years except for a minor blip in 1990, there are a couple of, I would say, more fundamental things than that. One of them is, if you go back to his childhood, his mother taught him, as her faith taught her, that the ups and downs of all our lives are strands of a fabric that God weaves for each of us to fit our circumstances. On the night, for instance, in 1976, when Reagan lost the presidential nomination to Gerald Ford, he was standing with the wife of our Senator Richard Schweiker, who was his vice presidential pick. And Schweiker's wife, overcome by the sad outcome, started to cry. And then she felt a comforting arm on her shoulder, and Reagan said, "Don't worry, it's all part of God's plan." And this was one of the deepest held parts of Reagan's faith throughout his adult life, that all events, great and small, find their motive power in the purpose of the Creator. From the largest theme on his middle horizon, which was the planting of America as a beacon of hope for the world, to the mere outcome of a presidential nomination, all things he thought served the greater purpose. And the duty of man was simply to rest content in the ultimate goodness of God. This was the faith that sustained him through disappointments and defeats, and is probably the most intimate part of that mystical connection he had with Americans, and especially, I think, with conservatives in this vast nation of believers. There's a lot more in the doctrine of his church, the Disciples of Christ Church, that Reagan as a young man absorbed and made part of his adult personality. The assumption that America was a blessed land set apart by God for some divine purpose in human history. The optimistic belief in progress. The emphasis on private charity as a cure for the nation's ills. All these things found a place in his adult rhetoric and in his actions. He once told the pastor of his Dixon days that all the hours of the old church and all of Nell's faith had come together in a kind of inheritance without which I'd be lost and helpless. Secular liberals will never understand that sort of thing, but conservatives do. So that's one of the great things, I think, that connects us still with Reagan. Another one of his attractions, especially these days, is his unabashed and emotional patriotism as an American. And it was so even back when he was a Hollywood liberal in his younger days. In World War II, he spoke often to troops heading toward danger, and he was powerfully moved on those occasions. He recalled one time a singer started the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and he said a strange and wonderful thing happened. All over, men started coming to their feet, and when she finished, there were 17,000 soldiers standing, singing with her. An English fellow actor said after the war he had never met an American who so profoundly believed in the greatness of his own nation. In the movie Born on the 4th of July, I mean the good old one, not the new anti-Vietnam movie, Franklin Roosevelt tells George M. Cohan, "You Irishmen wear your patriotism proudly, right out front, just like a flag." And that was Ronald Reagan all over. And what a contrast it is today with the president who comes around the world bowing to tyrants and apologizing to America. In the days of Trafalgar, Britons used to speak of the Nelson touch. And a perfect example of the Reagan touch is his address to the 1992 Republican Convention after he had stepped down as president. He said, empires had always been defined by a landmass, subjugated people, and military might. But America alone in all of history is an empire of ideals, of democracy, of free men and free markets. And the liberals thought that America's glory was a brief flash of time and a burst of greatness too bright and brilliant to sustain. Reagan said no. He said, we were meant to be masters of destiny, not victims of fate. Just 2 years later, in a remarkable public letter I think we all know, he told Americans that he had Alzheimer's disease. And he closed with 2 simple sentences. I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. I know that for America, there will always be a bright dawn ahead. To the very end, it was classic Reagan. He could see all too well the shadow of his own mortality, slowly blotting out his remaining years. But America's life was eternal. One of the most powerful things Reagan did for us as conservatives, besides emphasizing his faith, his patriotism, was to take the conservative movement from where he found it in the 1950s as a backward-looking, pessimistic bunch of people and turn it into forward-looking optimism. Leading conservatives of his early days, like Russell Kirk and Bill Buckley and William Rusher, looked to Edmund Burke, the English thinker of the 18th century, as their model. While Reagan quoted most often Thomas Paine, Burke's great nemesis in that age of revolutions. Paine's exuberant claim from common sense, which I think we all know, that we have it in our power to make the world over again, was one of Reagan's favorites. The last thing Edmund Burke ever wanted was to remake the world. Burke looked backward, not forward. Stability, order, and tradition, these were his watchwords and those of his 20th century disciples like Kirk and Buckley and Rusher. They thought they were fighting a courageous but rearguard action against the relentless push of collectivism at home and communism abroad. Whittaker Chambers, remember, thought that his conversion from Communist Party member to anti-communist meant that he had gone from the winning to the losing side in the world. In 1955, Bill Buckley famously said, the duty of conservatives is to stand athwart history and yell stop. By the 1970s, Buckley had come to a melancholy conclusion that victory, so far as I can see, is beyond our reach. Perhaps it was meant to be. While old-time conservatives mourned the leftward drift of history, Reagan believed exactly the opposite. He said to the British Parliament, he predicted a march of freedom and democracy that will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history. It wasn't the West, but the Soviet Union, which runs against the tide of history, by denying human freedom and human dignity. He told American evangelicals that communism was just another sad, bizarre chapter in human history, whose last pages even now are being written. In short, Reagan was the eternal optimist. Carly Simon says, let all the dreamers wake the nation, and Reagan was nothing if not a dreamer. Others might classically accept the restraints of current reality, but he dreamt of new worlds, new possibilities. What if one could halt the relentless reach of government into the lives of Americans, or end the Soviet Empire's rule over 1/3 of a billion people, or free humanity from the fear of nuclear holocaust? To Reagan, these were noble dreams that could change the world. But it was precisely this that made Reagan, when he became president, seem to Washington sophisticates to be either incredibly stupid or breathtakingly naive about the actual world in which people must live, govern, and nations negotiate. But he had that rare capacity to fear thought, not to fear thoughts that roamed beyond the current consensus. Now, usually, as we know, the consensus is right, and these far-ranging fancies are not. But what if the runaway thought, the wild hope, should become the new reality? Then the world would change. And beyond tax cuts, repealing regulations, and economic growth. This is Reagan's greatest achievement, I think, for conservatives, the victorious end of the Cold War. He often said his Cold War strategy was simple. We win, they lose. Amazingly, that is exactly what happened. For years, the wise men of the West, the men in the academic world, the diplomatic corps, the chancelleries of Europe, had their reputations and their egos invested in continuing détente, peaceful coexistence, and mutually assured destruction. They assumed an indefinite future of continuing Cold War. The Soviet Union was a fact of life here to stay. In the end, they were left in the dust by Ronald Reagan's naive vision of a world free of nuclear terror, free of Soviet communism. We win, they lose. He believed that noble ideals like human liberty, religious freedom, and national self-determination should rule the modern world. And there was no place in that world for a totalitarian empire based on Marxist ideology and brute force. The day of kings and of kaisers was long gone, and the day of the commissar was fast fading into twilight. He thought that the Soviet Union, the world's last great empire, had simply overstayed its time on Earth. In 1980, before he was president, he said, "What I think the Russians would fear most is that the United States all of a sudden would hitch up our mouth and say, 'Okay, Buster, we are now going to build what is necessary to surpass you.' And this is the last thing they want from us," he said, "an arms race, because they are already running as fast as they can, and we haven't even started running yet." And this is exactly what he did as president. He set the new tone in his very first press conference. Some of you might remember this because it was so startling. He said, "The Soviets reserve the right unto themselves to commit any crime, to lie, and to cheat in pursuit of world domination." The journalists could hardly believe it. Nobody since Harry Truman had dared to insult the Russian bear. Walking back from the event, Reagan asked his national security advisor, Richard Allen, "Dick, the Soviets do lie and cheat and steal, don't they?" And Allen said, "Yes, sir, they do." Reagan just smiled. "I thought so." Reagan's approach to foreign policy was simple. He learned this, like his hero, FDR did in the 30s. Weakness in democracies leads to aggression by tyrants. Military strength can prevent war. His Cold War policy was a five-pronged offensive against the Soviet Union. First, what we all, I think, pay attention to is rhetorical effort that delegitimized the adversary, casting it as a leftover from the age of empires, out of place in a world where democracy and human rights should be the ruling values. And for us, I think the prime example of that was his evil empire speech. The second part of the offensive was rebuilding American military power. And boy, the liberals really screamed and shouted when he tried to do this. They called him a warmonger, an idiot, a man who was going to lead the world over the nuclear cliff. But Reagan thought the Soviets couldn't afford to keep up, and they'd have to negotiate mutual cuts in nuclear arms or simply be left behind. Third, he challenged the Soviets in their own sphere of control. He gave massive aid to the Solidarity movement as it undermined communist rule in Poland, and military aid to the Afghan rebels that drove Soviet casualties to such uncomfortable levels they had to give up. This was called the Reagan Doctrine. He tried to squeeze the alien Soviet economy by reducing earnings from its energy exports, which even today is about all they've got to sell overseas. He tried to block a Soviet pipeline to Western Europe. And boy, if he'd been successful, Putin would be in a whole different place right now. And he tried to get Saudi Arabia to pump more oil so the price of oil would drop and the Russians would lose revenue from that. And finally, there was the thing that liberals probably mocked the most, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Even some people in his own administration thought this was an expensive folly. But there's no question the leadership of the Soviet Union was terrified of it because they knew they could not win a technology race with the United States. And what Reagan hoped was this multi-pronged offensive would make the communist regime see that the Cold War was just too expensive and that cooperation and liberalization were actually in their own interest. And when Gorbachev took over in Moscow, he saw precisely what Reagan hoped he would. He knew there were no longer two superpowers on the earth. There was only one, and it was led by Ronald Reagan. When they met for the first time in Geneva, Reagan arrived early, and he was waiting in the villa when Gorbachev drew up in this big black limousine and got out armored against the cold in this big hat and this huge scarf and this gigantic overcoat. If you've ever seen in the Peanuts cartoons, Charlie Brown wrapped up to go outside in the snow, that's exactly what Gorbachev looked like. And Reagan, who seemed even taller than he was, standing up on the steps of the villa, smiling and confident in his tailored blue suit, no coat, no scarf, no hat, bounded down the steps, grabbed Gorbachev's elbow and kind of led him up like, hey, need some help, old fella? You could hardly believe Gorbachev was 20 years younger. It was the perfect image of how Reagan saw the world. Prosperous, confident, welcoming America, facing an adversary who was shaky, uncertain, and walled off from encroaching discomfort, at last beginning to realize its own inferiority. Gorbachev was a smart guy. He knew he'd been had. When they got inside, he asked Reagan, next time we meet, will it be coats on or coats off? At their next meeting in Reykjavik, Iceland, Gorbachev tried every trick he knew to get Reagan to give up SDI, and he failed. Looking back later, he said Reagan's stubbornness in Iceland was the turning point. Gorbachev knew he was beaten, and he'd have to unwind the Soviet Empire. And Reagan, of course, pushed this home in his 1987 speech that became so famous at the Brandenburg Gate, where he praised Gorbachev for starting profound changes in the Soviet state. And then he spoke the words that resonated all around the world. He said, there is one sign the Soviets can make that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Probably the most famous words of his, not only presidency, his entire life. And of course, the wall came down. Not right away. Empires that have lasted 70 years don't fall overnight. But 2 years later, Eastern Europe was free. From Poland through East Germany, to the streets by the hundreds, and then the thousands, and then the tens of thousands. And they stared an empire in the face. Made it quake. And the iron grip of the Soviets that had clutched Eastern Europe since World War II was gone. And before 2 more years had passed, the Soviet Union itself had vanished from the map of the world. In his ancient funeral oration, Pericles said, famous men have the whole world as their memorial. Ronald Reagan's memorial is Berlin, free of its ugly wall. Eastern Europe, free of Soviet troops. And humanity, free of its nuclear nightmare. It might not quite be the whole world, but it is certainly memorial enough. An empire that had sprawled across Eurasia from the Baltic to the Pacific vanished, crumpled up by its now free people, and tossed, just as Reagan had predicted, into the dustbin of history. One of his speechwriters, Peggy Noonan, found in Stephen Vincent Benet's great poem about John Brown words that to her described the end of the Cold War. Sometimes there comes a crack in time itself. Sometimes an image that has stood as fixed as the polar star is moved against an unfathomed force that suddenly will not have it anymore. That force exists and moves. And when it moves, it will employ an actual stone to batter into bits an actual wall and change the actual scheme of things. And for us conservatives, Ronald Reagan was that stone. His words and his actions brought down not only an actual wall, but the regime that built the wall. By refusing to accept 4 decades of Cold War and nuclear fear, he changed the actual scheme of things beyond anyone's imagining. But as we know, there are plenty of people who deny Reagan any credit for this. Because to give him credit would to admit that his simple view of the Cold War, we win, they lose, had, like the sword of Alexander, struck to the root of the thing, while the wise men of the West stood baffled before the Gordian knot of mutual assured destruction, muttering the charmed words écante and coexistence. After the collapse of the evil empire, it became fashionable to say, well, the Soviet Union died of internal dry rot and had nothing to do with Reagan. This isn't the view of the leaders of the newly freed nations of Eastern Europe. Lech Wałęsa, Poland's first post-communist president, said Reagan was irreplaceable. Without him, there would have been no victory. Mark Lahr, Estonia's prime minister in the 1990s, was even more pointed. Without this man, he said, I would be somewhere in Siberia in chains. Ronald Reagan was a man who changed history. Even Soviet leaders themselves admit that Reagan was the one who administered the coup de grace. Gorbachev's foreign policy spokesman said Reagan was the gravedigger of the Soviet Union, and the spade that he used was SDI. According to Foreign Secretary Edward Shevardnadze, Reagan, he said, knew the Soviet Union was spending far more on the military than its creaky economy could afford. So along comes Reagan and says, I'm moving more chips on the table. You will have to match me if you want to stay in this race. And the head of the Institute for the USA and Canada bluntly admitted it was Ronald Reagan who won the Cold War by raising the cost of potential victory for Moscow so high it collapsed from the strain. Well, liberals are probably always going to argue with us about this, but it's going to be harder for them to convince those who are actually on the ground in Eastern Europe, like Wałęsa, or in the Soviet government, like Gerasimov, or in the Gulag, like Natan Sharansky. And I think they'll find it hardest of all to argue with the statues of Ronald Reagan that stand in the liberated cities of Eastern Europe, and with the people who erected them, and to this day thank Ronald Reagan for their freedom. One liberal pundit who has changed his mind is Gary Wills. He made great fun of the president in his book Reagan's America back in 1987. But in the 2000 edition, he now says part of Reagan's legacy is what we don't see. We see no Berlin Wall. He said, excuse me, he said, tear down this wall, and it was done. We see no Iron Curtain. In fact, we see no Soviet Union. He called it an evil empire, and it evaporated overnight. Well, an exaggeration, but you get his point. Now, as one measure of how the world has been transformed, think about this story. 1960, Nikita Khrushchev, dictator of the Soviet Union, comes to the United States to attend a meeting of the UN. And in a long tirade denouncing America, he raised his hand and banged his shoe on the table. And it was his boast that communism was the wave of the future. We will bury you, he used to say. 1999, 4 decades after his father's anti-American outburst, Sergei Khrushchev came to the United States, raised his hand, and took the oath of allegiance as an American citizen. In, when was it, 88, Reagan had told the students at Moscow State University, anyone from any corner of the world can come and live in America and become an American. And now Sergei Khrushchev proved his point. Anyone, anywhere, even the son of a dictator from the heart of a formerly evil empire. It was a different world indeed. Reagan himself probably summed it up best, as he often did in his last address from the White House. Once you begin a great movement, there's no telling where it will end. We meant to change a nation, and instead we changed the world. And so we have. Now, the question for us to consider today is, what would Reagan have us do if he were here to advise us today? And I think if we look at his life, his beliefs, his actions, it's pretty clear. He would say, for one thing, don't give up. You might have ups, you might have downs, you might fear the country is in great danger, as he indeed thought it was back before 1980. but if you persevere, you will win. Reagan thought nothing in the end could keep Americans down. He often said, "Now, we can do anything we want." Why shouldn't we believe that? After all, we are Americans. I think he would tell us, stay true to the founders. They knew what this country was all about. They knew what a challenge it was to build the world's only republic in a hostile planet full of monarchies. And they succeeded. And it's up to us now to keep the pledge that they made to the rest of the world. Here you will find your hope. Here you will find your example. Think about this. Reagan would be, I think, immensely proud of these. 1989, Peking, China. Students marching through the streets on their way to Tiananmen Square. And before the machine guns mowed them down, the tanks ground them under, they carried before them an emblem of their hopes. It wasn't a big picture of Mao or of Lenin or of Marx. It was a huge gleaming white model of the most famous statue on earth, the Statue of Liberty. 1991, 2 years later, Albania, most backward country in Europe, having the first free election in the 1,000-year history of the Albanian people. They were standing in line for hours to vote, and after the polls closed, they stood around into the darkness waiting for the results to be announced, just to make sure it was real and not a fraud. And the American ambassador said you could see them by the thousands in the central square of the Capitol, just standing there waiting. And he said, a lot of them were clutching little flags, but not Albanian flags, American flags. And they were chanting something. He couldn't quite hear what they were chanting. It started in one side of the square, and rippled through the crowd to the other side, and then somebody would pick it up somewhere else. And finally, the noise got close enough he could hear. And here were these Albanians standing into the night for hours in the darkness. On the night of their first free election in 1,000 years, they were clutching little American flags and chanting, USA, USA, USA. That's what Ronald Reagan did. And that's, I think, what he would tell us today. Do not forget, you are the example for the world. It's up to you to show everybody else on this planet how free people live and what a free people can do. Because if we fail, we not only lose for ourselves, we lose for everybody else in the world. And I think that's the message he would like us to take most to heart. And in the dark times, take courage from that. And when it's time to do something, as it is in this election year and 2 years from now, get out, work hard, and make sure that you actually make it happen. So that's all I've got to say, except that you have this totally cool book back there that has all this stuff and a lot more in it, and I made the publishers let me sell it to conservatives at a discount. I regret to say it's still $28, which is more than it should be, but it's a lot cheaper than buying it direct from them. Don't give them the satisfaction. Pick it up in the back when you leave. I have a few minutes for questions.
Are there any questions out there?
That was easy. Yes?
Here you go, Bruce.
Ronald Reagan's first run for the presidential election, he lost. And the Republican Party, I think, was against Ronald Reagan. Could you comment on that?
You mean the first one in '68 or the one in '76?
Okay, maybe it was the second one, but it was the one before he was elected.
Right. Well, of course, he was challenging an incumbent president, and you know Republicans, you don't challenge incumbents in the Republican Party, or everybody gets mad at you. Reagan hadn't expected, of course, to run against Ford. He thought Nixon would serve out his second term, and it'd be an open race, and he would have as good a chance as anybody. And when Ford got in, he, like a lot of conservatives, thought, well, this guy's been a solid conservative in the House, we should be supporting him. And then when he found out Ford was planning to give away the Panama Canal, and he refused to shake Sakharov's hand because he was afraid it might make the Russians mad, and a few other things like that. Reagan said, "That's it, I'm getting in the race." And we sometimes forget, yeah, he lost, but boy, how close did he come? Oh, he went through and lost the first 5 or 6 elections in a row, bet everything he had on the last roll of the dice in North Carolina, and surprised everybody except him by winning. And from then on, it was nip and tuck with Gerald Ford, and the President of the United States, for gosh sakes, was deathly afraid that Ronald Reagan was going to beat him. It reminds me of that little poem, you know, about the man who, how does it go? On a lonesome road, he walks in fear and dread, having once looked back, turns around and no more turns his head, because he knows a frightful fiend close behind him tread. Well, Reagan was the frightful fiend, and Ford was scared to death of him. And it was only at the end, by essentially pulling people into the White House, delegates in the White House, and promising them whatever they wanted, that Ford was able to win by about 100 delegates. On the way out, next day, there were signs all over the place, Republicans, you picked the wrong man. And, of course, as it turned out, they had. Anything else? Yes, sir?
Wasn't it the peanut farmer Carter that signed off on the Panama Canal?
Carter was the one who negotiated it, but it still had to be ratified, and Ford was supporting that. In fact, some of Reagan's big conservative comrades, like Bill Buckley, were in favor of the Panama Canal Treaty. And Reagan had to debate some of his own friends on this. Yes, sir?
You may not want to comment on this, but it seems to me like we found one of the few presidents who could have reconstituted the Soviet Union.
You mean the current poor excuse? Yes. Well, you know, it goes back to what Reagan and FDR both said. If the democracies are weak, the tyrants are going to triumph. And like it or not, we are still the only country that has a worldwide reach, the only country that can give backbone to other countries. And if we have a president with no backbone himself, you know, the world is not going to be a nice place. Yes?
Ronald Reagan at one time was head of the Motion Picture Union.
Right.
And apparently a profound liberal. Comment on what changed him and when did it happen?
Oh, Reagan was so liberal that after World War II, the FBI had him on their suspected communist list. And the funny thing was, Reagan was trying to fight the communists that were trying to take over in Hollywood, and so he was reporting to the FBI on some of the, I mean, these are not just, you know, parlor kinks, these are actual card-carrying people, members of the party. He's reporting to them, on them to the FBI. Meanwhile, there's another unidentified person reporting on Reagan to the FBI. So that's how liberal he was. In fact, Nixon, some of you may remember, won his Senate election in 1950 by running against Helen Gahagan Douglas. He called her the Pink Lady because she voted almost down the line with a virtual communist member of Congress from New York. Reagan supported her, not Nixon. But what changed him, I think, was several things. The way he tells it, first, it was his Army service. He never left the country, of course. He worked in what they called Fort Roach, which is where the Hal Roach Studios used to be in Hollywood, making movies for the military. And he said, when the military was running Fort Roach, the bureaucracy was very small. But as soon as they started hiring civilians to do some of the clerking and stuff, he said they moved in 5 file cabinets full of regulations, and they had bureaucrats there. He said it was, for a little tiny place, it was unbelievable. That was his first experience, really, with the federal bureaucracy. Then he went to England to make a movie, and he saw England in that post-war year, post-war time when it was under a socialist government. He said, that cured me of any idea of government ownership of anything. And the third thing was the whole battle in Hollywood, not so much with the communists, but over union violence. He was, as a union president, he went to the AFL-CIO conference one time nationally to sort of make the case for whatever it was they were for, and he came away shaking his head that these people were cynical, They talked about violence, beating up people, killing people. He couldn't believe it in the labor movement that he was part of. So that's, I think, where he first began to wonder, am I hanging around with the right people? But the big change came in a part of his career that we really hear very little about. The 8 years when he worked for General Electric and was MC of, the GE Theater. But the more important thing is they hired him to spend a quarter of every year going around the country to the General Electric plants. They had like 50 of them around the U.S. And what they wanted was to, give everybody a sense of corporate togetherness. Reagan was sort of the glue that was going to hold all these people together in one group. So he'd go in, he'd talk to management, then he'd go down and talk to the workers. He'd tell Hollywood jokes. He'd talk this one union member to another. And he said, he would tell them about tough times, in Hollywood, tax rates are high. And then these guys, these were not managers, these were workers, union members on the shop floor, would say, hey, if you think it's bad, listen to what's happening here. And they would tell them tales of the government messing up General Electric regulations that make their jobs harder, taxes on them. And so here were these union members turning this liberal union boss into a conservative over a period of 8 years. When he finished that up, he was no longer telling Hollywood jokes. He was talking about the same kind of stuff you heard him talk about, for instance, in the speech he made for Barry Goldwater. He said there was one amazing thing that kind of showed him what it was all about, though. He said all through the 50s, when I was denouncing big government, when Eisenhower was president, everybody thought, oh, good for Reagan. As soon as Kennedy was elected, he said, all these liberals who used to cheer me on turned on me, and the federal government started investigating him. They sicked the IRS on him. It's not new. And he said, now I understand. If you're saying mean things about a Republican or a conservative, it's okay. If you're saying mean things about a liberal, then you're the enemy and they're going to destroy you. So all that stuff put together moved him in a conservative direction. When he started with GE, he was still the Hollywood liberal. When he finished in '62, he was the conservative that we've known ever since. Well, I don't want to overstay my welcome, so you tell me when it's time to stop, okay? One more question.
Question right here.
Do you think there's a candidate today that would fill the qualities that we're looking for in the
That is an interesting question because we kind of overlook a lot of stuff about Ronald Reagan that we probably wouldn't overlook today with anybody else. When he was president, he gave amnesty to 3 million illegal aliens. He never signed a balanced budget, was passed the biggest tax increase in the history of any state in the entire country, signed the most liberal abortion bill in the whole country. And right after he was governor, he single-handedly defeated a voter referendum on the California ballot that would have kept homosexual teachers out of the classroom. Well, if anybody today came up with that record and said, hey, elect me, I'm a conservative, we'd laugh him right off the stage. But we overlook those things with Reagan, I guess because what he did and who he was so powerful that we cut him some slack. So I don't know today. It seems to me, and this might be not a nice thing to say, but it seems to me like we have a lot of B-list players, but I don't see the A there anymore right now. There are a lot of people who, there's this good thing about them, that good thing about them, that good thing about them, and someone will emerge. And for that matter, someone might emerge who just gets elected this fall to some office, just like Reagan did, elected in '66, presidential candidate in '68. So I don't know. I don't think there's anybody, putting aside just policy, I don't think there's anybody I see right now who can grip the heart the way Reagan could. Not only of conservatives, but of American people. And so I hope things turn out okay 2 years from now. But
Ben Carson.
I hadn't thought of Ben Carson. I keep thinking of office holders.
I think I know it.
Anything else? Well, I'll just say there's a stack of outstanding books back there at a price that really isn't as low as it should be, but it still beats what the publisher would charge you, and I'll be delighted to take orders And if you don't have any money, there's a sheet there where you can tell me to reserve you a copy, and I'll be glad to do it for later. Thanks.
Okay, we're down to final announcements and house cleaning, housekeeping. Cleaning comes later when everybody has to put these chairs away. But on a public service announcement, I just want to point out something totally removed from this. I did it last year in September. This month is National Prostate Cancer Awareness Month. And every year in October, the facility that I went to, I spent 7 weeks there in radiation. They have a reunion, and the reunion this year again is at Shady Maple, and it's free. And anybody that wants to go, you're welcome to be my guest. All I need is your name and your wife, and there's room for you. And it's not a high pressure thing. It's not a sales pitch. It's just you'll see camaraderie of 25, 30 gentlemen there that have gone through this at the same facility that I did. But other than that, I mean, I'm looking, actuarially, 1 out of 6 of you folks are going to get it, one of you men, so I'm talking to 1 out of 6 of you. There's half a dozen DVDs back there that shows how the system worked that I went through, and you might want to pick one up if you wish. It'll give you an alternative option, because there's radical solutions, but it might be worth your time, and you're welcome to it. And if you're interested in going to Shady Maple, you can let me know too. I see some people here this evening that took me up on this last year, and it's a nice social event, and besides that, you get a free meal. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to announce next month's meeting, which is Candidates Night. It's usually a very large turnout, so we hope to see you all there with an additional person or two with you next month. And Randy Tolman's going to close out the evening with a prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the evening, and we thank you for leaders of the past, and we ask you, dear Lord, raise up some leaders for the future. Let some of the leaders come out of this group. Let us understand the problems that we are now facing. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good safe trip home.